their futures. Soldiers speak out.
Welcome to the Veterans Hour, a monthly program of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 109 in Olympia, Washington. And this month we have a very, very special offering for our viewing audience. This is Memorial Day weekend 2013, and we see many missing man formation flyovers throughout the country. Well, we at VFP 109 have our own missing man. We have missing camera operator number 1. Ken Welk died May 8th from colon and liver cancer. Ken served in the Army in Vietnam, where he was exposed to Agent Orange. Ken was a founding member of VFP 109 and a faithful cameraman for Veterans Hour for more than 60 monthly programs. He was passionate about peace and social justice, as well as a talented singer and actor. I would like to introduce our president of VFP, Zahid Chowdhury.
Members of VFP 109 would like to honor Ken Welk. Ken Welk.
Presente!
Ken Welk.
Presente!
Ken Welk.
Presente! We also want to welcome Vaude DeVille, one of Ken's close friends, and Vaude will share a song that is very meaningful for us as well as for Vaude. I present Vaude DeVille singing in Ken's honor.
I'm just an old soldier with a story to tell. In the crusade for freedom, I marched into hell. I saw the bombs bursting and the rockets' red glare. You can't know the heartache unless you were there. And the veterans who lived it can't leave it behind. The images linger, they clutter the mind. In the heat of the battle, I saw young men die. Before it was over, I saw America cry. In the name of old glory and the land of the free, we lost our tomorrows as we made history. Lord, we've seen it all happen so often before. Can we never find freedom without facing war? When the battle was ended and the cannons were stilled, we tended our wounded, we counted the killed. We lost Bobby and Nathan and Roger and Clyde, just part of the thousands who suffered and died. And they'll soon be forgotten as time marches on, though I still see their faces in the mists of the dawn. For they were my brothers. They stood brave and true. They gave their tomorrows for the red, white, and blue. In the name of old glory and the land of the free, they gave their tomorrows to save you and me. Lord, we've seen it all happen so often before. can we never find freedom without facing war? I'm just an old soldier with a story to tell, and I'll never find peace in a world gone to hell.
Ken Welk served in the United States Army in Vietnam. He died from colon and rapidly advancing liver cancer. He was repeatedly exposed to Agent Orange in Vietnam. And we want to encourage our viewing audience who have served in Vietnam to participate in the Agent Orange registry by contacting your regional VA office. Thank you. The Vietnam experience has touched all of us and has influenced veteran authors and poets. And we are blessed in chapter 109 to have two published authors of our chapter. Mark Fleming wrote At the Speed of Foot in 2012. Welcome, Mark.
Thank you.
And most recently, we really want to thank Larry Kerschner, who has just published a collection of his poems with the title Grave Lines. Welcome, Larry.
Thank you.
I'm very interested, and I'm sure our viewing audience would be interested, how did this Vietnam experience influence you as writers and poets? And so I'm going to bounce that question off of both of you, but I also want us to have a conversation while our cameras eavesdrop on our talk. So how did the Vietnam experience influence you as a writer?
Well, for me, in simple terms, it gave me something to write about that I can't forget. It keeps rolling around in my brain, and I keep processing it and thinking about it, and over the years come to a different perspective. And I've written some poetry. My book about the Appalachian Trail includes it, so it's always there. I mean, and even if I'm not writing about Vietnam, somehow it influences the way I think about other things.
And this is your first book that you've authored?
First book of prose. I had a book of photography out earlier, but that really didn't touch any of this.
And I know that that book has a number of references towards your experience and how that has influenced you on hiking the Appalachian Trail.
Right.
And I'm going to ask the same question for you, Larry. How did your Vietnam experience influence you as a poet?
Well, the Vietnam experience influenced my whole life. And I've written poetry since I was a child, but really didn't start taking poetry seriously until I had returned from Vietnam. I met some poets in Alaska and started trying to deal with the feelings, the impressions, just the whole experience of Vietnam. And somehow poetry, for me, seemed like an appropriate way to deal with it. It's a way of trying to encapsulate strong, intense scenes or emotions in a small number of words.
Thank you. And I know both of you have returned to Vietnam 30 plus years after you got an invitation to go there. And we'll touch on that in just a moment. Larry, you have a book called Grave Lines, and I'd be very interested how you chose the title Grave Lines.
I actually went through about 6 or 8 different titles, and finally, most of the poems in this book are fairly intense. I described it as being in your face kind of poetry, and for the person reading it, I want them to understand this is a grave thing that we're talking about. And there's a double entendre of grave and headstones and that.
Being serious as
Right.
well as headstones.
And lines, in the military, you're always got to be in line, lines of poetry. So it was kind of a double entendre. And I ran across something that Yeats wrote in a letter to a friend of his. He said, "I am still of the opinion that only two topics can be of the least interest to a serious and studious mind, sex and the dead." And the next book that I'm planning will take up the other topic.
Okay. You did warn our viewing audience that this was an in-your-face collection of poetry, and I didn't really catch that until I read the first one, and it was called Answering a Question. And the first line said, "The first man I killed was small and hidden in the tall grass." Well, that caught my attention, and I realized this is a serious poem. Would you read that one to our audience?
I will. This poem came out of something that we did in this chapter, 4 or 5 years ago. There were a number of us wanted to do something to help with counter-recruitment. So I came up with the idea of interviewing a dozen veterans and asking them the question, what would you like someone who's considering going into the military to know? And we did a 3-minute interview with 12 people, 1 conscientious objector and 11 veterans. And then we got some local bands to put some music in. We put that CD out. And this poem came out of part of what I had to say to answer that question. That's where the title comes. Answering a question. The first man I killed was small and hidden in the tall grass. Being a killer forever changes you. Even if you learn to be kind and considerate and civilized, that part of you is always there, hiding down inside, awaiting a chance. A normal person does not want to kill and will avoid it at all cost. The military won't allow you to remain normal. It doesn't matter if you think that you are smart enough not to get caught up in their lies. They will change you. Don't be sucked into the biggest myth and lie that killing and dying for your country is somehow heroic. Really be all that you can be.
Thank you, Larry. I've known that several times you have shared with your close friends a lingering, unwanted memory, lingering, unwanted thoughts from your Vietnam experience. And one was perhaps the one that sparked that poem, The Belt Buckle. You want to tell us a little bit about that? Or maybe they could see why that sparked this poem.
Actually, I know what you're thinking of. This poem actually, when I first got there, I was an Armored Personnel Carrier driver. And one of the first battles that I was in, we were driving through some tall grass, and there was a man hiding from us in the grass. And as I rolled over him, his head got caught in the track and caused the track to come off the vehicle. And the driver's job is to put the track back on the vehicle. And it's, there's, 100 shoes. Each one weighs about 25 pounds. So you have to take the bolts out, lay the track out, jimmy your vehicle, bring the track back in, put tension on. And this is in the midst of a firefight, the shooting at you while you're doing this. And this man's head had caught in the track, so his body parts were all the way across the track. So that's a pretty intense memory, the smell and the sound and the whole tension. So that's part of where that poem came from.
Thank you for sharing that. Mark, you had a different experience than what Larry did, but it still has influenced you greatly in all of the things that you are involved in peace and social justice. And one of those things, as I understand, it led you to take a long walk.
That's true.
Do you want to tell us about that? Because that is the title of your book, At the Speed of Foot, which is about the only speed I move in nowadays.
And it's the speed most people don't move in, which is what gave me the idea for the title. And the long walk started, I came back from Vietnam, and I didn't have anything happen to me like what Larry did. I was in the field, things were going on around me, but it never touched me in that way. So nothing happened, right? So, but something wasn't right. And I came back to Virginia and found the mountains and started walking. And of course, I'd learned to backpack in Vietnam. I could carry a heavy pack, and I could hump mountains in a long time. So I started walking, and all the years I saw the Appalachian Trail. Like, well, it goes this way to Georgia and that way to Maine. And wow, I could never do that. Well, long story short is, yeah, I did. I mean, I finally decided I wanted to do it. But by this time, that was 30 years later, and Vietnam was just there. You know, it was something I'd sort of dealt with, but nothing happened, right? So I went walking, and the experience was pretty profound. That it was with me. It had always been with me on the trail, but they were always short trips. You know, walking in the woods, yeah, it's like kind of like Vietnam, but it's over in a weekend, you're back to the job, back to normal life. Well, now it's day after day after day after day.
And when you say after day, we're talking maybe 2 or 3 months of walking?
Yeah, I mean, the whole trip was 180 days. This really took place in that first half as I walked into Central Virginia. That's where this had all happened, and it really helped me come to terms with it. I mean, I can't change what I did. I mean, I went to a war I believe was wrong. I can't change that. But what I can do is take that experience and relate it to others. You know, tell people, like Larry does with his poems, that this is what happens, and this is how it changes. And the ironic thing is, I went to Vietnam thinking, I'm just going to get past this, I'm going to get it out of my life and get on with it. And I realized you don't get past it. That was a big...
Well, in page 71, you said, thoughts of and about Vietnam followed me up the trail.
Yes. They were there. You know, it's like I called it my daily thought parade. Everything, you know, I would think about Maggie, I would think about friends back in Phoenix, I'd think about this, but Vietnam was always there. And there were some days, I don't know if I can find it right off, but some days just felt like I was back in Vietnam. The sense that I had, that I'd be walking along, yeah, I'd be walking along and there could be a booby trap, or I could set one. There was always something in the wood line you needed to check.
Yet this is somewhere along Appalachia,
This is back
and your mind would go right back to...
I was back in the world, and somehow my mind was back in Vietnam. And also, like Larry, you know, Larry mentioned you met poets. I was going to ask, were those poets necessarily veteran poets or just poets?
The ones that I met in Alaska were not veteran
Yeah,
poets.
and I had a similar experience.
I actually didn't get involved much with veterans until I joined Veterans for Peace,
Yeah.
and that was, I don't
About
know,
8 years ago.
10 years ago, yeah.
But I had an experience of falling in with poets, and they could express themselves in such short, direct bursts. And that's how Vietnam comes across much better. I mean, there are people that have written fantastic novels, nonfiction pieces, and all of which add to it. But if you really want that sense of how it was and in the immediacy, the poetry really works.
What you just said reminded me of this poem. It says, driving, I remember to note sights which would be good for an ambush. Walking, I watched the ground for dirt which may have been recently disturbed in the laying of mines. Over 40 years later, I still expect the bullet to hit that spot just below my left scapula that always itches like a target. Over 40 years later, I remember when we were boy warriors thrown together far from home. Gun smoke, thick as fog, hot brass litter, the lamb-like smell of napalm, burnt indigenous personnel, piles of bodies, slowly moving limbs in rigor, green thick Vietnamese jungle vines, sticky red clay mud in monsoon season. If he wasn't part of that piece of me that couldn't come home, maybe I could remember my friend's face 40 years later. It's that same feeling. It's always there.
You can't forget.
Yeah.
Now, I know that Mark and I volunteer as independent accredited claims agents. And one of the things that we almost invariably come across with Vietnam era veterans is post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm sure both of you are familiar with that. My friend Mark took about 30 years to even realize some of the things that you were feeling and experiencing, others didn't feel. And that was post-traumatic stress.
Yeah.
And it really didn't hit me until I came back from the trail and I was talking to other veterans about this experience. And they said, that sounds like PTSD. And I had that. And then if I didn't need another reminder, the following year they started the Iraq War, and that just brought even more. So.
Yeah, I didn't realize that. I applied for disability with the VA because of the diabetes related to Agent Orange.
Yes.
And in the process of that, I had to talk to a psychiatrist, and he told me that I had PTSD after discussing it. It hadn't even occurred to me.
And
know, 'cause
yet
I
you
thought-
were a working health professional.
Exactly, and I thought, I've dealt with that, but you really haven't.
Well, and all of the veterans we come across develop certain coping skills, but unless they've really gone through specific treatment, it doesn't really go away.
And that's where the writing comes in handy. I mean, just being able to express it and put it on paper, it does force you to put it in some order and give it some perspective. And I mean, writing helps me sort through things, whether it's this or any other subject.
Well, and some do what they call journaling, and it's that journaling that helps them do that. Well, both of you are unusual in the fact that you're not only published authors, but you went back to the very place that caused you this distress. Why?
I went back to pick up the trash. Except the really
Okay, tell our viewing audience, what does that mean, picking up the
Well,
trash
for
by
those-
going to Vietnam?
For those of you who are old enough to know Alice's restaurant, he had to pick up the trash, and I kind of thought that would be what I should do, because the one thing I did directly was I littered. I mean, we did a lot of other things that were worse, but I directly left trash, so I think I should pick it up. Well, that wasn't to be done, but the idea of doing something positive. And the Appalachian Trail gave me the sense of doing this extended walk and the same skills and not being part of a military machine. So to go back and do something positive helped add another positive experience to that. So I arranged a volunteer effort. I went back and served as an English language conversational resource. I guess that's what you would call me in the Da Nang University English language program. And actually, I went with Maggie, and both of us would talk to classes. And it was just a lot of fun. I mean, we were talking to Vietnamese students. They were in college, but they looked like they were in high school of age. And I mean, they were eager to learn. They were eager about America. They were fun to talk. I mean, they're just a great interest. And everybody in Vietnam was amazingly friendly. I mean, everywhere we went, even when they knew that I had been a soldier there. And for me, that was just an amazing revelation. I
You
mean,
were expecting just the opposite,
I mean,
probably, huh?
they certainly have every right to be. I mean, think about how would an American feel about, someone who tried to invade their country? I mean, it was hard to ken, and even then, I felt uneasy. I don't know. Did you have that experience?
It certainly, I expected to feel that way, but I ended up not feeling that way. When I was there, I was in the bush the whole time, except for maybe in 14 months.
This is the first time around.
The first time around. I was out of 14 months, I was in the bush except maybe 5 days out of the whole time. So I really didn't have much interaction with Vietnamese. They were either shooting at me, we were buying dope from them, beer from them, or they were ARVNs, the Vietnamese military, who we didn't have a very high opinion of. So I actually had more interaction with the Montagnards than with the Vietnamese. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I went back with a group called Soldier's Heart, Ed Tick's group, and we flew into Hanoi, were there for a few days, went down to Hoi An, Ho Lan Bay, Da Nang, then up to Kon Tum, then down to Ho Chi Minh City, and then out to the Mekong Delta. So we saw a lot of the country. And a couple of things. 75% of the population of Vietnam wasn't born when the American War ended.
Yes.
So they have no they have no memory of that. So that's one reason why they were friendly. We were allowed to do, or had the ability to do 3 clinics with Agent Orange victims. And at one of the clinics, it was all NVA veterans who were suffering from Agent Orange stuff. And we talked to them and found out where they were, when they were. And there was about 15 of them who were, John Fisher was the guy leading the group. He and I were in the Central Highlands at the same time. And there was about 15 of them who were in the Central Highlands, so it's possible we were shooting at each other. And yet there was no rancor, absolutely, I mean, it was hugs and very friendly. So, I mean, it was pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I thought just the generosity was quite satisfying. I mean, people were willing to help us. Maggie and I were invited to the grand opening of a local cafe in the neighborhood of our hotel. We got to go to the English language department New Year's party. One of the teachers also worked as a guide, so he took us on some tours. We even got to do the third world bus thing that we could have never done on our own. And all this in a country where I had been the enemy, and they had been.
Yeah, just the irony of it strikes one, doesn't it?
Yeah, and we saw a country coming alive. What I saw, I was in the bush about half my tour, and I was at the Bien Hoa Army Base, and I really had no more contact with Vietnamese than you did. They were just there, and sometimes I never really left America.
How did both of you get the opportunity to change from civilian clothes to provided government issue?
Well, it was kind of mandatory at the time. I actually volunteered knowing I was going to be drafted, thinking, yeah, I'm just going to get this behind me. Right.
So you're RA.
Yeah, I'm an RA.
RA 198980455, sir. I never like push-ups, so I memorized that.
I'm a US.
And see, by the time I got around, it was Social Security number, so it was easy to know.
Yeah, I was a student at the University of Washington and doing very poorly in my student. I was partying too much, and I fully expected that I maybe would have been asked not to come back. I was a class of 65 there, so it would have been 66. And I had a marriage that was breaking up at the same time. And I found out years later that my brother-in-law, who was a lifer in the Army, on his way from Germany to Vietnam, stopped at the Seattle Draft Board. And I don't know what he told them, but in those days, you normally got 30 days notice when you got drafted. I had 10 days notice.
You had 10 days, very quick.
When I got drafted.
He informed them of your student status?
He did something
tenuous
along
status?
those lines, yeah, so.
Now,
That's
Larry, Vietnam is not the only area that has encouraged you to make trips. You've gone, I guess, to Iraq, you've gone to Korea, you've gone to Afghanistan.
Yep.
What is motivating you to do these type of exchanges?
I felt that I want to be involved in peace and justice work. I think when you're dealing with some of the military issues, being a veteran gives you a certain cachet. It allows you to say things and people will believe you just because you're a veteran. Well, I wanted to go to these places and be a witness of what is actually going on there as a result of American imperialism, so that when I come back and I talk to people, they'll know it's not something I just read in a book or somebody told me. So it's the sense of wanting to be a witness.
One of the poems that I would like you to read, I want to have you read in honor of Ken Welk, whom we did a presente before, and that's on page 29 in your new book.
Which
The bottom part, the war was black and white.
The war was black and white at first, but then in living color, red and yellow and khaki green, brought into the living room, but what was always missing was the smell of war. My war smelled of dying vegetation, ode to Agent Orange. burnt gunpowder and burnt people, dark blood, sweet and warm, piss, shit, sweat, testosterone. The same smell is found in what is left of a pizza shop in Jerusalem. Now the smell of war is in Jenin and Ramallah. Piss and shit and blood mixes with the frustrated cries of the people. Helen Caldecott holds up a picture of a baby with his head blown off. The smell of his head seeps up through the concrete rubble after the tanks roll on. The same smell of piss and shit and blood rose in the hot desert some days after Iraqi soldiers were buried alive. The same smell at Waco when the embers died and the smoke cleared. The same smell of more piss and shit and blood was found by firefighters and police digging below the Twin Towers space. The same smell, more piss, more shit, more blood, was found near Kabul, raised with the dust by bombs from 40,000 feet. Next, we'll find that same smell in some new axis of evil, where the smell of oil is added to the smell of dead children, added to the putrescent odor of piss and shit and blood, of war and death, should gag us all. However, as Erasmus said 500 years ago, war is sweet to those who know it not. And I think that's part of the Veterans for Peace mission, is to make war real so that people understand the true cost of war. It isn't, it isn't just a column you read in the newspaper.
And it's not just parades, and it's not just flags. It's all those things you just described. And also, that is part of a longer history of the United States.
Yeah, that's a
which I thought was
sub-poem.
interesting. Yeah.
The whole poem is called U.S. Military Diplomacy from Wounded Knee to Afghanistan, and it lists all of the military interactions from 1890 to 2000, and there's not a single year in which the U.S. military wasn't involved in some action around the world or in this country during all those years.
Yes.
I mean, when I was in Vietnam, when we were in Vietnam, I think it was the 73rd? Anyway, in Detroit, 43 people were killed by the military in Detroit in 1968. I mean, so.
Ever active.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the thing, one of the things that we do bring as veterans. We've seen it, it's going on, and we want people to know it hasn't stopped. And I think one of the lessons I've learned from Vietnam is, we thought when the war was over, it was over.
Yeah.
And then went on with our lives, and the war went on. It continued. And it wasn't until later that, for me, it was Ronald Reagan and the nuclear buildup and ground zero, that there is this war still going on. I'm a veteran, I can speak out.
One of the things I so appreciate about our dearly departed Ken Welk was he was passionate about peace and social justice, and it was his experience of Vietnam that forever changed him. And I have clips of him speaking, even up on the Capitol grounds, basically warning today's youth that will become the cannon fodder, of just that. And that's why I so appreciate Veterans for Peace. Would you like to share a portion from At the Speed of Foot that speaks to you, that it might speak to us?
Let's see if it turns up the way I hope it will.
While you're looking for that, I have to say, when I got the copy of the book from Mark, I didn't think I was going to like it. I'm not much on outdoorsy kind of books, but when I started reading it, I had to read it until I finished it.
Yes,
It
isn't that
just
something?
sucked me right in. It's an incredible book.
So thank you very much, I appreciate that. So yeah, one of my experiences was just thinking about Vietnam and how it related to what I was seeing. So here I'm in Central Virginia now. So among my memories of Virginia are events and decisions that took me to Vietnam. My first hike along the Appalachian Trail was to Humpback Rocks, only a few days ahead now, not long before I joined the Army. The fear and turmoil of that time are forever linked in my mind with the peace and joy I found at Humpback Rocks on a beautiful spring day in 1970. On that one afternoon, I transcended the chaos confronting my life and saw the earth in its infinite wonder. But the experience lasted well beyond that one afternoon. That world of beauty and wonder was my mental refuge in combat. Even in the worst situations, I could recall the serene beauty of the Blue Ridge Mountains and the Shenandoah Valley, and see the same in Vietnam's mountains and jungles. That beauty stilled my fear. And that is what came back to me on the trail, how calming that was. And that was just an image I took with me. So like I was looking forward to that. And if nothing else, I could look at Vietnam and I could see this is a beautiful country. You know, most guys I served with thought, this place sucks, I want to go back to the world. And actually, I want to go back to the US and the world too, but Vietnam was really beautiful and fascinating. And I think in one regard, it was one of the great experiences of my life because it gave me a perspective I would have never had.
Yeah, I spent all my time in the Central Highlands, and geographically, it was a lot like Washington State with vines. I mean,
Yeah.
And was that near the place that you were deployed?
Yeah, in fact, on our trip back, John Fisher was also in the Central Highlands and was also wounded there. And he and I were both able to find the spots where we were wounded, and were able to do a little ceremony. I wrote a poem and burned it and did some incense, and it was a lot of closure.
Part of that
in
healing
sense.
process
Yeah, so,
that you had carried for 30 plus years?
right, yeah.
And in my case, we got close to where I had been. We could see what I think were the mountains, and we didn't actually get into the area, but we did an interesting trip that got us close.
Now, both of you have written books, but our viewing audience will say, where do I get these books? Now, I'm privileged in the fact that I've got signed copies from the two resident authors of VFP 109. So let me start with our most recently published author and say, how do we get your book?
Well, you can contact me at my email. It's larry@peacepoet.me, and I will let you know. It's $10 plus $2 shipping.
And we'll have that on
And
the
I'll
video
autograph
screen
it.
so that they'll see it, and you'll autograph it
I
too.
will.
Okay, and your book.
And mine, you can go to my website, which is www.speedoffoot.com, and you can find a button that says Buy Now. It's very simple. It costs $14.95 plus shipping. Or you can buy a Kindle edition on Amazon. Just go look for Speed of Foot, and you can get the Kindle for $4.99 or $5.99, I think. So it's readily available in any form you want.
Thank you. Larry, I was moved when I read on page 69, "Whoa there, partner."
Oh.
And that was an interesting one. Why don't you read that for our audience?
Yeah, I'm not even sure where this one came from. It just sort of happened one day. Whoa there, partner. Democracy doesn't mean choose your own government. An American broom of culture and rightness sweeps history clean. Didn't you know people aren't even a sandstorm in this desert landscape where our free market vision will be built? We religiously sing the new American spiritual, a simple melody of redemptive violence. The song we sang with patriotic pride at Mylè, Nagasaki, and Dresden will replace your grandfather's wailing tune. Your illusions will be cured by the chemotherapy of depleted uranium, leftover cluster bombs, and Yankee enthusiasm. You will sleep at midnight. I will steer the boat down the Euphrates. It's the American sureness that we know we're so exceptional that we know what's best for all of these people, especially the brown and the black people, that whatever it is that we think should happen, it's obviously meant by God, and that's the way it should be. So, yeah, when I was in Iraq, this was between the two wars, and seeing all of the kids there that had diseases as a result of the depleted uranium. I talked to one pediatrician who, we were there in August, And between January and August, she had seen so many kids, it was like 60 kids with major fetal anomalies that, you know, a normal pediatrician wouldn't even see that many in a whole career. And yet we're doing nothing about the whole, you know, depleted uranium. We left over 3,000 tons of depleted uranium in Iraq, and that has a half-life in the billions of years. I wrote this one poem. We stopped at a hospital one day and met this 14-year-old boy named Kamal. He was nothing but skin and bones, and we just visited him there in the hospital. And I breathe in Kamal 3 days from death in a Baghdad hospital. I breathe out a happy, laughing 14-year-old boy. I breathe in the grasping Imperium. I breathe out America as she should be. I breathe in my life. I breathe out. It's, you know, the destruction to the children of the world that we're causing is the thing that moves me most. You know, we killed 500,000 children under the age of 5 through the 13 years of sanctions against Iraq. And Dick Cheney had the gall to expect that our troops would go in there and they would greet us with candy and flowers after having killed 500,000 of their children. It's you know, to me it seems like American foreign policy is, we will kill your children until you do what we say.
Until you like us.
Or even you like us, yeah.
Well, keep in mind, Dick Cheney didn't have the experience you and I had about going to war.
Yeah.
He still sees it as
Exactly.
one of those great
Yeah,
ideas.
John Wayne movies, yeah.
Larry and Mark, one of the things I do with veterans is emotional freedom techniques. And you've shared, both of you, some very hard things. I want us to pause right now that you can join me and our viewing audience. So if you want to put your book down, one of the things that we can do is to help us to de-stress and to deal with some of these memories and unwanted memories is to do the following. So I want you just to join me and tap on the meridian point. And this would be just a quiet one. We don't need to say words, but our minds are filled, our subconscious is filled with some of the thoughts, the poems, the images that we have, and it's good that we just take that time to de-stress. And if you want to tap on the other meridian points, there's a point on the eyebrow, just on both sides. We can tap on that. And on the side of the eye. And underneath the eye. And on the nose, underneath the nose here. And under the chin here. And this will make a sound that our mics will hear, but it's just on the chest here. And then under the arm. And on the top of the head. And I want each of us to take a deep breath and to let it out slowly. Many times when we're dealing with veterans who have the type of experiences that each of you have experienced, we have a subconscious memory of that event. And I know you have as a poet, and you have very carefully brought out words that I was reading with my eyes, but I was tapping with my hand, Larry, just so that you would know, you know. And as you were sharing poems, I was mentally tapping, because I know that those are stressors, but it gets the truth out. And we, as Veterans for Peace, want to have a show that deals with the cost of war we also want to see healing brought to victims of war, both those that were part of the occupied countries that we were part of, and also ourselves and others. And so I'm glad that we have that opportunity to share with our viewing audience. What are you proposing to write about now, Larry? You said you had some other writing projects in mind.
I'm planning a book of love poems. This, you know, I've dealt with these poems for so long that I forget how intense they are until I do a reading and I see how uncomfortable I make people. And
that's good.
And it's good, but they, you know, people do, somebody emailed me the other day and they said, this is not an enjoyable book to read. And it's not. So I want to kind of balance my karma by putting a book of poems of love and that side of it. So.
Do you have any future projects that you want to write about?
Well, I still have a bunch of Vietnam stuff that I haven't written. I don't know that I want to go there at this point. I said, well, this may do it. And like Larry, thinking about what else could I write? I mean, I write essays, I still cover events, and it's still nonfiction. Well, maybe I should try some fiction, and some more poetry.
Now, to our viewing audience, most of you have not seen Mark very often. That's because Mark is behind the cameras in another function, and we appreciate you being part of what we call the talking talent
It's different
tonight. It's a different part. You can't switch all of a sudden if the camera's on you. And Larry, you had a career as a nurse practitioner.
Yeah.
And you have recently retired.
And I highly recommend it.
It's a very good thing. I recommend
I
that
did
as
that
well.
once.
You did that once, it didn't take, so you'll
Yeah.
try it again.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, with practice, you get very good at it.
That's right.
I think one of the reasons I went into nursing, I mean, there's probably a lot of reasons, but it's a way in this culture for a man to be nurturing. And that was something that I needed to do after Vietnam. So I think that's part of why I did that.
Well, one of the things that we really want our viewing audience to do is to get a copy of Gray Lines. Is there a poem that you would like to share? And I want to leave time on our segment tonight. We have a clip from Ken speaking out on the Capitol steps, and I wanted to be able to share that with our viewing audience because Ken was very eloquent. He was also an accomplished singer and an actor. And I didn't learn this until all of a sudden I learned some of these things about Ken Welk.
Thank you, Nova. As a veteran, all we have to do is look at what effect this war is having, not only on our veterans who are returning, but also the issues from a financial point of view and how it's in terms of jobs, job creation. As we go into recession, these are individuals who will be coming back, whether National Guard or reservists or whatever, or even active duty who want to get out of the service at this time. In a recession, what does this do? They're the ones that are going to be suffering the most. The second thing is, as far as that's concerned, we have before us right now a bipartisan bill in Congress, the new GI Bill, that is being supported by the Democratic Party, but not by John McCain. You know, this is really a big question mark we should be asking at this point. Why is John McCain not supportive of the new GI Bill, which is designed to meet the needs of our returning veterans? Another aspect of this, and not in terms of the economy, but I would like to speak to another cost of the war. From a personal point of view, I have, for the last 4 years, as a part of an organization, Veterans for Peace, have been involved in putting up Arlington Northwest. Each year we put this up in honor of those who have fallen in Iraq. And this last year, and each year when we do this, we're there overnight with the crosses and headstones. And what I want to speak to is another cost of war to me that really came home very strongly from a personal point of view this year. I was out there at 1:30 in the morning, and this young man stopped by. He'd been driving around the area. He saw the crosses and headstones, and he told us that he has just had to come by and talk to us. This was a Marine who had been in Iraq, had shared with us what experiences he had during that time, and not just his experiences while he was there, but you could just see the pain and agony that was in this man's heart and how it had affected him. Here we're standing out in 50-degree weather. Well, it was about lower 40s, maybe even higher 30s that night. And we were out there with him for an hour and a half, 2 hours. He was in a short sleeve shirt the entire time. Wouldn't sit down. It just basically, you could just feel the hurt and the pain that was in this man's voice as he spoke. PTSD is a serious issue that is affecting our returning veterans, and it must be dealt with. It must be dealt with. This is a cost of the war that we just need to respond to. And finally, you know, there's an organization that I firmly support, and that's Iraq Veterans Against the War, IVAW.org. If you want to learn more about other soldiers' experiences and what's been going on, testimony, and hopefully the media will pick up on this because it's already been a national event occurred back in the Washington, D.C. area where veterans who had been there and the family members and so on spoke out as to what their experiences have been. War is hell, folks. You know, we know that, and it affects people the rest of their lives. And you just had to read some of these testimonies. Go to IVAW.org and see what that's all about. And lastly, there's going to be a regional Iraq Vets event where we're going to have another town hall meeting in Seattle on May 31st, where local vets who have returned will be speaking at that time. Pay attention to that, folks. This is what's happening to our soldiers and our families as a result of what we're doing in Iraq today. Thank you.
Well, we're the Rachel Corrie chapter
Yes.
109, and I wrote this poem for Rachel, so maybe we could end with that. In this rubble of war, we continue to live with you. Clipping mint into steaming white teacups, we remember your smile. We remember the sweet lemon of your laugh as our children play in the dusty highway. We remember your heart. Another Rachel is buried along another dusty road near Jerusalem. When Jeremiah spoke of her weeping for her children, he prophesied of you. Each lamb sacrificed for a wedding feast or funeral strengthens those to come. Our God said that with all of our sacrifices, we must offer salt. We remember the salt of your tears. Ibnati, Rachel, daughter, you still live in our house. For Rachel Corrie, 1979 to 2003.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing with us, Larry. Do you have any final thoughts that you would like to share with our viewing audience about what maybe their experiences might be and what they can do with them?
Well, I think you don't want to run away from them. You want to process them and work with them and make them meaningful to you. I mean, that's how it worked with me, and it's not a set pattern that any one person can say, do this or do that, but how it works, what you can do for yourself.
And on Fridays at Coffee Strong off of Exit 122 on Union Avenue, we have veterans benefits. And one of the things I want our viewing audience to be aware of is if you're a Vietnam era veteran and you were one day in country, you most likely were exposed to Agent Orange. And there are some presumptive diseases. And one or more of those presumptive diseases took our friend Ken Schwelk's life, and you have diabetes that was presumptive of Agent Orange. There are others that we have, and we want our viewing audience to be aware that they should get into the Agent Orange registry with the Department of Veterans Affairs.
And you do that by going to the medical center. So here it would be either Seattle or American Lake, and they're required to give you basically a physical, and they'll test you for those known presumptive conditions.
There is a VA clinic in Centralia now too. I don't know if they do that there,
But that would be the first place to
But
go.
they can go
Yeah.
to there and then
Right.
arrange that.
Yeah.
Then a brand new thing on Tuesday, we did tapping, and we do effective or emotional freedom techniques, EFT. And we do that on Tuesdays from 6 to 8 also at Coffee Strong. And we do this for de-stressing and for pain relief as well. So I want to thank our viewing audience for watching tonight. The poems that you've heard, some of the stories, truly are in your face, but that is a result of war. And as Veterans for Peace, we want to totally share with you what the total cost of war is. And hopefully that we'll be agents to prevent future wars. I want to thank you for watching on Thurston Community Television, TCTV, on Channel 22. And shortly after it's shown, we'll also have that on the internet. And we want to thank you for watching.
Soldiers speak out. We can tell the truth of what we've seen. We are not liars. Soldiers speak out. We have a duty to all children and to their future.